Hey everybody, Mike, Erre, Tim Stafford, Voxology Podcast. I don't know if you meant to tune in, but you're here now, so you might as well stick around. Why not? We are delighted that you're here. Thank you for those who tuned in intentionally and those, maybe who didn't, but are still here. Yeah, and you're thinking, oh, gee, two middle-aged white guys have a podcast. Shocker. I will say, however, we were podcasting before it was cool. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
And after,
except for the next hour of me saying things. That's all I'm going to say. Tim Stafford, it's been another week. How are you? We just literally we appear on our little app to each other and hit record. So this is legit catch up time.
Legit.
It's legit. How are you? What's this week been like?
It's been fine. It's been a week. We were just talking. I feel like I'm existentially tired.
Yes, down in the bones.
Yeah,
of Tim Stafford.
A different kind of tired.
Yeah, Tim.
I was thinking about money a lot because it was with all the Jimmy Kimmel stuff, and obviously you saw him get pulled off the air, but then you saw that it was largely more about a corporate merger that they wanted passed than it was about anything that he said on the podcast. So it ended up being about money, and then Disney lost like $4 billion. So they're like, well, let's bring him back on the air. And it's fine. We can make nice. So it's like everything is about money. Even that, one of our friends sent us a podcast from Pod Save America with Heather Cox Richardson, like a really smart historian. And even when she was talking about the current climate and going back through history, even with segregation stuff, it was like less about race and more about money. Like it was just
That's
like
Malcolm Foley. That's Malcolm Foley's argument.
Yeah. The greed is at the heart
anti-greed gospel. Yeah. Greed is at the heart of racism.
It's interesting to go back through it. She talked a lot about the myth of the American cowboy, but how much what the reality of what that looked like, and the money that the government needed to bail out the American cowboy, and how it was a sign of white strength, but at least 1/3 of all cowboys weren't white. But it has. She was taking it all up to the MAGA movement and what it means to be American. That movement in particular has grabbed, because Reagan and Bush both kind of grabbed onto that stuff. But I don't know. It's just like we have a narrative of American history, but really human history, but American history that's one version, and then there's like this underlying money. Like,
and speaking of really that, you can support the podcast on Patreon entirely. So that's why we're doing this, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's time we throw that out there. Absolutely. Yeah. Dude, totally. And it's interesting because we're in a time and a place where I think maybe that's always been true. I mean, I think that's what Heather Richardson was saying. But it's so much more obvious now, and it's just out in the open, and it's like, that's just what business, turns out to be. And so kingdom people are called to live by the Jubilee understanding of the world, which is so antithetical, to that.
We really see it when you read stuff about like the mammon, like just the different ideologies, how like just bold they both were in how to kind of posture yourself in the world and what matters in the world. So this like Jubilee idea is so counter to the, I don't know, it's when you take a larger macro view of things, the obvious nature of all of it becomes much more clear.
Yep.
We're like,
and Jesus has a lot to say. Yeah. Jesus has a lot to say about this. And if you ever want to read up on like some great material on mammon and how Jesus warns against it, The Upside Down Kingdom is a book we've recommended before by Donald Crable. And he's got a chapter in there on mammon that is ridiculous. Oh, YouTubers, there it is. And Seth. Well, I will say this. I don't know if the rapture happened. I don't know that you and I would be good tests for whether or not the rapture happened. But Seth Erre is still here. So I'm assuming it didn't happen. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if I tuned in today at our prescribed time and you weren't here. I would be like, well, of course, Tim's empathetic and loving. I wouldn't be shocked that I was still here by myself. But it's Seth. Seth is he's the canary in the coal mine in terms of rapture readiness. So if Seth's still here, and it's wonderful. It's so wonderful to introduce an entirely new generation to false rapture prophecies.
It's been a minute.
So yeah, welcome.
In the 80s, they happened all the time.
88 reasons why the rapture was going to happen in 1988. And I was 17 years old going, nope, I want to have sex first, please. And
let's break it down to the reality of everything.
I mean, I'm just saying. So it's been a week, and it's been a really tender week for lots of people, meaning the podcast we released this week has provoked, I think, more text messages, social media messages than anything we've ever done, because of just how sensitive and raw and vulnerable people are feeling. I was texting with people I haven't heard from in years, folks that are trying to navigate difficult conversations. A pastor friend was just saying he sent it to his little house church small group, and even some diehard Kirk fans were wrestling with, the implication. I mean, it's we're so grateful to play a small part in some of this stuff. And so thank you for all of the encouragement, all of the questions, all of the sensitive sharings of how you're processing all of this stuff. It's really beautiful, and it's humbling, and it's significant. And so thank you. And it feels like a really tender, vulnerable moment. We recorded the podcast before the memorial came out. Mm-hmm. And so we just wanted to offer a few thoughts, not because anyone is asking and begging for our take on things, but I guess, my friends, it feels really important right now, maybe more than I've ever felt, to let people know they're not crazy, because we're here. That's the thing I'm hearing personally. It's just, am
I crazy? Am I crazy?
Am I? Yeah. I don't understand what's happening. But I also think when we talk about being a centered set, kind of focused community, the number one job of the center set motif is to clarify the center. What is it and who is it that we're centering on? And so when Jesus is getting hijacked, so in our view, blatantly, it's incumbent upon not that we're the arbiters of who is the right Jesus or not, but Jesus is. And so the closest we can fly to how Jesus talks about who he is and what he's about are the four Gospels, and particularly the heart of his ministry and teaching, which seemed to be the Sermon on the Mount. And so that's what we hold up. That's one of the North Stars we talked about episodes and episodes ago, is if it acts like Jesus and talks like Jesus. Well, no, if it only acts, because you can talk like Jesus all day long, right. But if it acts like Jesus, then it's Christian. And so lots of Christian language, lots of Christian imagery floating around. And it's not because we enjoy in any way, shape, or form, but it's I don't know. I don't think that represents the real Jesus at the heart of the Gospels. And so it's with a bit of reluctance and kind of I'm over this. I wish we could talk about something else, but I sort of feel, and I think Tim does too, we have to keep clarifying why it is that the gospel that's being portrayed in a lot of social media circles isn't the real gospel. And it's actually, even though it uses Christian language and it calls itself the gospel, why the ways it's being shared, the imagery behind it, why that actually cancels it out. It's actually a corrupted version of Jesus that we are ending up discipling people into. Now, the good news is that Jesus accepts all the people, because I came in as someone poorly discipled into Jesus, right? Jesus was my hell deliverer. And so I come in fearful. I come in with just the ticket to hell. And then over the course of life, you realize that's not who he is. And so I think we would all rejoice that more people are going to church and more people are saying yes to Jesus as a result of what's happening in culture. I don't know that I would use the word revival to describe that. We'll talk about that in a little bit, because I think revivals can only be announced in hindsight. And I don't think they can ever be announced in the present, because Jesus was really clear, in the fruit of revival has a very specific shape. And it doesn't matter how many people are singing and how many people are praying. That's not what revival is.
It's
that may include that. I am pear-shaped, my friend, so I hope that's a compliment. So, frickin' Stafford asked me a question earlier this week. And he said, well, what happens when the church becomes the empire? And we have loads of examples of that happening. And it, when you go back to listen to either Revelation or Genesis, these big long series that we did in the past, one of the really tragic things that you realize is that that Babylon. So we meet Babylon in Genesis 11. It's the city that humanity forms to be a counter Eden or a counterfeit Eden. They're trying to re-inaugurate the presence of God, so they build a high tower. And because they're east of Eden, they've been banished. And so Babylon we first meet Babylon there, and then Babylon becomes a literal city and then a literal empire, but then it becomes an image of human hubris and violence and coercion and all that's wrong when humanity bands together in its fallenness. And so God uses Babylon to chastise Israel. But at one point, Israel becomes its own kind of Babylon. And so you have these examples of God's people who become the empire they're supposed to be the counter to. And when that happens, God initiates the covenant curses against them. Exile being kind of the culmination of those, but many leading up to that. We also have seen this in Roman history. We've seen this in American history. Whenever Christians let's just use the word Christian. Whenever Christians become embedded or wed to political power wins and the church loses, and
that's usually the goal of it.
Lose. Yeah, exactly.
When that marriage happens. So all of that, we did the Revelation study. We've done a lengthy Genesis piece. All these ideas of what it means with the church marrying empire. So I asked that question after the memorial, right? Because it's just hey, it looks like mainstream Christianity is officially this. And so when the church becomes wedded to the empire and the church becomes synonymous with one another. So we've seen that in history. We've seen what you just said with God kind of pushing them into exile. You guys need a
he opposes it every single time.
We're going to hit the reset. We're pulling the Nintendo cartridge out, blowing out the dust, putting it back in so it can play correctly. The church needs that. But now that we're actually in a moment where this seems to be, so it's not a rhetorical thing. It's not a story. It's not us looking back and being look at what happened when Israel did X, Y, and Z. And God said, no. Now we are here.
Yeah.
We're in that moment. So what happens when the church, do we choose exile? It doesn't seem like God's going to send curses in that. So we're in a different era, right?
Yeah,
so he's not going to push us into exile, or how that would even work. The whole thing, somebody else brought up this week, and I know this is a redundant point that has been talked about so many times, but just with denominational, there's so many different Jesuses in Christianity. And so it's which Jesus is the one that you feel the most comfortable with? Is it a Methodist Jesus? Is it a Lutheran Jesus? Is it a non-denominational? Is it the Catholic? What is the Jesus that you feel the most aligned and comfortable with? That's confusing right out of the gate.
Totally.
We have splintered everything so much. So it's, how does the church that's part of everyone responding to us with thank you. I thought I was crazy. I thought I was the only one after these last couple of podcast episodes in this week. I think there's going to be a lot more of that as we see this kind of solidification of church and empire. But on the practical boots on the ground, how do we posture and respond to that? Because I feel most of the time I'm just oh, no, I'm not that kind of Christian. To the point where it's just I'm not a Christian. Because it's just like there's so much negative cultural baggage attached to it. It's just like, I'm interested in this Jesus guy. I think that what he said and did is true.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stop there. I'm not taking any name tags on. I'm not buying into any club. I'm just like, we're just going to try to figure out how to live this way. But like, so that's why I posed the questions, because we're in the reality moment of the storytelling that we grew up in.
Yes.
And now it's like, okay, now you have to figure out how you're going to posture and respond in this time period of Christian nationalism, which people boldly take that title now as like, yes, I am a Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
Just
wild. Man, Tim, always, you're amazing. Secondly, so there is a deep, I don't know, theology, a theological theme of something called remnant that is all throughout exile literature. And so God always preserves for himself a righteous remnant. And it's from that remnant renewal comes. Ooh. And the remnant is always on the margins. They're always, I mean, it's the and I mean, we could do a deep dive into kind of theology, because every group is going to say they're the righteous remnant, right? Every single group in Jesus's day was using that language. So righteous remnant can easily become self-righteous remnant. And so I hesitate, but theologically, there's always a kernel of faithful people loyal to Yahweh that Yahweh uses then to renew. And this is what Jesus was doing with Israel. He was calling, he was redefining the boundaries of faithful Jewishness to now be collapsed into allegiance to him. And that's why the center focused, none of the boundaries, the previous boundaries mattered. It was all now allegiance to Jesus. And that remnant of Israel, that renewed Israel, became, the inauguration of both church and ethnic Israel. In other words, God was creating a new humanity out of both. And so there was a remnant of Gentile paganism and a remnant of loyalty to Yahweh that came together to form this new kind of humanity. And so remnant theology is the theology of the Black church. It's the theology that exists on the margins among the poor. It's liberation theology in its best respects, not in its worst. And it's the idea that as exiles and foreigners, we are announcing to majority culture the ways in which they are not representing the true teachings of, Jesus. Or Yahweh in the case of the Old Testament. Prophets would be raised from the righteous remnant and so on. So I think what we should do, Tim, is explore the postures, the hopefulness in the midst of the pretense, the grief in the midst of denial, the reality in the midst of ideology. I think like those prophetic postures are worth exploring as a small group of folks trying to live into resistance. Now, all of this language can be easily co-opted into just another tribal unit. Yeah, but the remnant, totally, and but the remnant, and we're going to talk about this. The remnant always exists for the whole. And so if the remnant exists, I mean, this is why Jesus, would look at like the Essenes who just withdrew into desert-like communities, and he did not join them. In fact, he said, my prayer is that that God would not take you out of the world, but that you would be delivered from the evil one. And so remnant theology is living as exile in the midst of a majority culture that doesn't share your priorities or values. Now, so you have examples of true Israel within greater Israel, or true church within greater church, right? And so I think those, like the monastic movements in some cases, are great examples of that. I think there are instances where church has just joined empire. I mean, I think the slave trade, where the church was, at least the white church was totally in Southern white church. I don't know about Northern white church, but Southern white church was it joined at the hip with that. So I think there are really good historical movements to study and go, okay, here are the postures of remnants. And again, the remnant is not a self-righteous. It can't be a self-righteous designation, because then we're just playing the majority game, right?
Yeah.
Which has come to power. So the purpose of remnant isn't to be effective. The purpose of remnant is to be faithful. And in faithfulness, then we bear witness to the different way of being human.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the reason I think you and I feel at least some obligation to give voice to the wholesale, not wholesale, but a big embrace, a large embrace of it started with Trump, as he's, we're not voting for a pastor, we're voting for a politician, and he gets us, he's for us. But now it's this wholesale, it's Charlie Kirk has become an ideology now, within the last couple of weeks. And it's like, okay, this is what it is to be Christian. And this is from the own words of, the people who are making these statements. Christianity is just indistinguishable from this. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think we're on really good biblical grounds to say, nope, there's idolatry here, there's blasphemy here, there's injustice here. And not that we're coming from a place of moral superiority. Rather, we're coming from a place that looks at the Gospels of Jesus and then looks at the self-proclaimed words and actions of people who say they follow him, and saying there's a difference there.
Yeah.
And so I think it is important that we just go over some of what we're seeing again and again and again. And I know it's annoying, and I'd rather just talk about how great Jesus is and how much we need him. And hopefully this, isn't mutually exclusive of that. But I just think because my tribe has embraced a view of empire that is indistinguishable from its Christianity, I just think you have to keep saying, nope, this is not it. And it's for two reasons. Number one, it's for people who are there, who are feeling queasy and who need to know they're not alone. But two, there are people, I have friends among them who initially voted for Trump, but are very hesitant and queasy about the things that are happening in the world. And I just think if there's a non-confrontational, gracious, joyful, non-compliant community that says, hey, your queasiness here isn't off base. I think there are people who, are really open to the possibility that this is mistaken, who wouldn't, we would normally sort of identify as people who are open. So having said all of that, let's talk about a big word, syncretism. Let's talk about syncretism. Dictionary definition of syncretism: and amalgamation. There's another word. Anytime the dictionary can use big words to define big words, I'm in. The amalgamation or attempted amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought. Syncretism, just quite honestly, is when you blend two things that don't naturally go together to form something different. That's neither the one nor the other. And the blending is also
what amalgamation means, isn't it?
It is the combining. Yes. Yeah. So it's a tautology, syncretism is an amalgamation. Sure. That's right. That's saying the same thing twice. All right. Syncretism is a massive concern of the biblical text. It's all over the Old Testament writings and Paul's thought that Israel would not blend its unique and distinctive worship of the unique and distinctive God, Yahweh, with the practices, the images, the lifestyles of the pagan nations around them. And pagan here just means non-Christian.
Man, you could have a field day with that for a while.
Oh, what, pagan? Or just distinctive?
Yes. Culturally marrying our kind of techniques or whatever with.
Yes. Oh, bro. Yes. But I just want to start by saying in the Old Testament, this was the number one concern. And that's what it meant when God said, be holy because I'm holy. It was to be distinct, reflect Yahweh's distinctness. And so many of the Torah laws that seem weird to us were actually invitations to forsake the practices of the Israelites' neighbors who engaged in different fertility rites or dietary practices that mixed different pagan elements or whatever. And so, when you're like, don't wear, two kinds of fabric, or don't boil a goat in its mother's milk. And you're like, what in the world? Well, there are actually cultural antecedents to those that had Yahweh, and that's where the prohibition against tattoos came. That I wouldn't worry about today.
Right.
Where I know, yeah, exactly. Yep, we're showing YouTube our tattoos. But the point is that the number one thing that Yahweh was concerned about was the syncretistic temptation of God's people. And that's why, like, even the first thing they did after they got the covenant was the golden calf. It was syncretistic in that they threw a party to Yahweh. They just used the golden calf image to do it. And that's why God prohibited no images, because the ancient people wanted an image. So syncretism has been with us the whole time, and it's been the number one thing that Yahweh was concerned about. It oriented a lot of the Torah and a lot of the warnings about inheriting the promised land, about why they had to drive the people out. When they didn't drive the people out, they would just fall into temptation. This represented the like crowning, like, awfulness of the kingship, is that they would syncretize. So they would have, the high places are mentioned all over the Chronicles of Kings and the prophets, because you would worship Asherah, a fertility goddess, or whatever. I mean, it's all over the place. And then when we get to Paul, for Paul, idols are both nothing and something all at the same time. Mm-hmm. They're not real in the sense that they do not have power, but they're real in the sense that they do have, like, they pull people's allegiance to them, and they can cause us to stumble. And there are powers and principalities sitting behind them.
Yeah.
And those are real. So I know we get into Paul's, like, eating meat sacrificed to idols, but the point is, Paul was constantly warning his churches about idolatry. Which is another word for syncretism. Now, when we're looking at the marriage of what we would call Christian nationism and conservative Christianity, that's what we're trying to argue is happening, is that there is a syncretism that's happening, an idolatry that's happening, that it hinders people coming to Christ. It muddies the beauty and glory of Jesus. It affirms the status quo in terms of power over in ways Jesus never would, so on, so on, so on. So when we look at 3 examples from this past week of syncretism in this regard. All right, example number 1 is probably one of the most obvious. It was at the memorial service, where we have this beautiful Christian moment of Erica Kirk, who stands up, and she said about her murdered husband, "I forgive the person that shot him, because it is what Christ did and is what Charlie would do. The answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. Love for our enemies and love for those who persecute us." You could not get a more Christian moment than that. I have no idea how much that costs to say, or I make no judgment of it, other than there it is. Like, not in word or song, but in deed. That is the heart of the gospel right there. I could not have agreed more, and cheered. Which was interesting then when the president got up and said about Charlie, he did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagree with Charlie. I hate my opponents, and I don't want the best for them. And what's interesting, both moments were cheered by the same crowd. As far as I know, it was the same crowd cheering, because you're sitting in the room. And so here's Erica announcing that the way of forgiveness and love of enemies is the best way forward, and the president announcing that hatred of enemies and the despising of enemies is the way forward. And we have a crowd that's sitting there, and as far as I know, cheering both statements. Because one has to do with our inner devotional life, and the other one has to do with our public life, and it's possible to reconcile them both if you look at them that way. And so here's a perfect example of people listening to the same worship songs that were on before, announcing the same Jesus, but understanding and having 2 completely different versions of the implications and outworkings of that. You got thoughts? Because your face again is saying
no,
things.
You just mentioned the worship stuff, and my
we'll get there.
Recoiled.
We'll get there.
Do you think that, like, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. We joke about it all the time. A lot of that stuff, like, how much of this do you think is just the comfort and the familiarity of culture? It's just, I'm so interested in why this has been a problem through all of human history of trying to marry certain elements of culture into Christianity and then celebrating it. And I don't know if it is just because there's a really high comfort level to it that things like nostalgia or familiarity offer. And so you're like, hey, I love the idea of being an American, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And the nostalgia of Make America Great Again, whichever era of America you're trying to hearken to.
Ooh,
like,
good use of hearken.
There's some element of, it's like a dopamine thing or something. I don't, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's something interesting that keeps drawing us into culture because there's some aspect of it that's comforting. And so we relate that comfort, make the comfort that Jesus brings, or whatever that Yahweh, like, whatever kind of things we've said, you know, these little Christian sayings or semantic things. Well, I'm like, well, I feel most comfortable when I feel safe and known as my whatever. So that's where I want to plant my faith, because that's what makes me actually feel safe and comforted. I don't know. I'm just picking at it. Like, I'm so curious as to how this, because you're right. There was like the adulations from both ends of that thing when they seem on paper diametrically opposed. And she was kind of sandwiched in between that with Stephen Miller and our president.
It's crazy. Man, I don't know. And I'm sure they're incredible historians we need to get on the show to ask that question too. I always go back to, what was the cost when we decided the gospel only had to do with securing your soul into heaven, and that everything else wasn't as Jesus related and important? And so, like, you get sort of left behind theologies where the world can do whatever the world's going to do, but my soul is safe, and I'm awaiting the rapture or whatever. And then you get in that left behind motif that America has a significant role. America is the new Israel in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're a Christian nation founded on Christian principles, and our job is to show the greatness of the Christian God by being a great Christian nation. And so on the one hand, you have salvation that only applies to your inner heart, the forgiveness of people like Erica, yes. But when it comes to culture war, Jesus doesn't have much to say on that. Remember when Matt Walsh came after us, we were talking about you can't engage in culture war and follow the Sermon on the Mount at the same time. And his point was the Sermon on the Mount is culture war. And so to reduce the gospel to having no practical implications other than being a good Christian nation because America is in the place of Israel and America has a role with Israel in the last days, well, then you would naturally get people who would privately affirm forgiveness, but publicly affirm revenge, right? Or privately affirm the dignity of everybody, but publicly affirm slavery. I mean, you just, like, the disconnect from Jesus. Well, and therefore the church isn't a political organization. It's just it's a devotional center for private individuals who want to have
devotional
internal
center
feelings
for private
God.
individuals.
yeah, right? It has no public implications. And so what's going to rush in to fill the void of public life? Well, it's a Christianized version of America that is nostalgic for sure. You're definitely on it there, but it's always been presented as the city on the hill. I mean, for as long as I can remember, that was always the way we talked about America. And so, of course, love of Jesus would lead to love of America, because and this, we're going to explore this next week. I think a guy named David Fitch, who we've had on the podcast years ago, has been arguing, and it's a genius argument, that Charlie Kirk has exposed the hollowness of the American church. Because the American church isn't discipling young men, and American church isn't giving young men and women the place to voice their real opinions. It's just another oppressive speech place where we enforce people away from genuine questions and wrestling and so on with names and social power. And it's a place where people are learning. Like he's founded something that is in its function a church for people. it done in the name of Christ, blah, 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 blah. But because the church has nothing to say publicly other than the black church or the progressive church or the woke churches, right?
Yeah.
If you're conservative wondering, well, what do I do with all this energy around public policy and public life together? Well, and Jesus is just your private internal savior. Well, then of course, I mean, why wouldn't you fall into a view of masculinity that says, listen, to be a man means to get married and to have children and to produce more Charlie Kirks for the world. And so anyway, I don't know if that analysis is true, but so much in my view, and I could be dead wrong about this, Tim, but so much in my view was taken out of Christian theology when we just reduced gospel to a private transaction for individuals. And that's where Paul's thinking around the church has been revolutionary to me in the last 10 years. And it's caused me to become, much more like Anabaptist in the, the most political thing that the church does is be the church. So I don't know if that's true, but I mean, that's where I would at least start and go, I think maybe there's something there. So that was the first example. The second example is something we posted on our socials yesterday. It's the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, which we started and are going to focus on someday. But it's juxtaposed to all of these Department of War images. So I want to read this. I want to read the image. I want to read the text and then the images that are accompanying, because I sat down and watched it slowly so I could get all of this down. And you just talk about pulling the heart out of the Sermon on the Mount and then using it around images that could not be more contradictory to the message of the Sermon on the Mount. This is Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's narrating the words, but the image starts, it's him in a blue suit praying in front of troops, Our Father in heaven. So here's Pete, blue suit, head bowed, praying with troops. Hallowed be thy name. During that phrase, there's wind swirling past mountaintops. And at the word name, they show there's a boom, and then they show I'm slurring everything.
The Michelin Man shows up.
And then they show missile launches with sound effects. So, hallowed be thy name. And then boom. It's missiles. Thy kingdom shows 5 missiles arcing through the sky. Thy kingdom come. At the word come, you see a fleet of American warships with an aircraft carrier. Thy will be done is the view of a cockpit of an American fighter jet. On earth, here's a tank slicing through the mud. As it is in heaven, paratroopers jumping out of a plane. Give us this day our daily bread. Here's a line of soldiers waiting to board a military transport. And forgive us our trespasses. These are war fighters on the ground covered by smoke. As we forgive those who trespass, Navy SEALs coming in with the tide, with the sunset behind them. As we forgive those who trespass against us, cut to a soaring bald eagle. So there's the us. And lead us, the image is a attack jet on a runway and a stealth bomber in the air. Lead us not into temptation. Here's special forces coming in on a rubber boat. But deliver us, and it's a picture of like a boat full of aid, from evil, cut to the troops on the ground. For thine is the kingdom, a soldier aiming down sights of a rifle, the power, a runway full of American fighter jets and attack helicopters, and the glory, a picture of an American flag waving. Forever and ever, a picture of the president, vice president, and the secretary of war saluting. Amen. It's a picture of the Pentagon logo with Department of War underneath. I don't even have words for that.
And what can you say?
Well, I also, I'm starting to follow all these accounts on Twitter, and like the, and this is where people are like, well, why weren't you this critical of Biden? Well, because I don't remember Joe Biden having
it's a moot
numerous
point. It's
Bibles. But like, Like the House GOP sends out, after I looked these things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Nehemiah 4:14. Tweeted out by the GOP Twitter account. And you're like, what? What? John 16. These things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. I mean, okay. Sure.
That's interesting.
Right? That's the House GOP. Or no, I don't even know if it's the House GOP. It's just the GOP account, I should say.
Well, it's kind of like that whole, I can do all things through a verse taken out of context, like that John verse, like, hey,
yeah,
peace you can have kind of in your heart and at home.
Yeah.
And out here, well, we're
that's
gonna
right.
fight. So it's it's fascinating. that whole ad plays like a weird Daily Show SNL skit.
Yeah.
Like if it was making fun of Christian nationalism, like this is so incendiary, most people would never ever believe this. And then you see and you're like, that's not the Onion, that's actually the Department of War.
Yes. So we'll comment on that in a second. The third one,
death of satire.
Oh, I mean, what do you say? So the third one is I transcribed Benny Johnson's 8-minute speech at the memorial. And there were lots of things that you could say and ask questions about. But I felt like this one was one of the most egregious examples. So I'm going to read his entire remarks so no one can say they're taken out of context. All right. And I didn't know who this was. This is a podcaster and a commentator or something. I have no idea. He comes up and he says, fight for Charlie Kirk. And then immediately, who feels the Holy Spirit in the house tonight? So who can feel that revival happening right now? How does it always work? What man intends for evil, God intends for good. Evil thought there would be a funeral today. God has created a revival right here in this house right now. Charlie always had that revival energy, didn't he? With Charlie's influence, I've become a Christ-centered man. And he gives a little bit of his testimony. All of you had a Charlie moment in your life, didn't you? Raise your hand if Charlie Kirk centered you a little bit closer to Christ. Did Charlie help you achieve your American dream a little bit more? Which is interesting, closer to Christ, an American dream. Mm-hmm. Did Charlie have that effect? Look at every single hand. Stand up and say amen if Charlie Kirk had that effect on you. And we cut to everyone standing. Look at this. 100,000 Americans, millions watching online, standing up and saying, that is the revival spirit of Charlie Kirk's life. And that is the power of martyrdom, because Charlie Kirk is a martyr in the true Christian tradition. If you're on YouTube, watch Tim's face as we're doing this. I cannot because I'm reading this, but I can see it out of the corner of my eye. If you take out a tyrant, his power goes away. You cut down a martyr, his power grows. And that is what we see. Time and time again, we're seeing it across this country. Who has seen full churches, the full parking lots? Who knows somebody now who is a Satanist or agnostic who is now looking at Charlie's life and this revival moment in this country and going, maybe I got it all wrong. Maybe I do need to Christ center my life. This is what Charlie always wanted, how he wanted to be remembered. In the mold of Stephen, the first martyr, Stephen was killed for speaking the truth about Christ, much like Charlie Kirk. The martyr Stephen was the same age as Charlie Kirk when he was martyred. At that time, Christianity was just a few very scared Christians in Jerusalem. And after Stephen's martyrdom, Christianity spread throughout the known world. The power of martyrdom. This is how God in Christ always advances his kingdom, and he's doing it right now with Charlie Kirk. It's wonderful to see we are all witnesses to a miracle. Charlie's life was a miracle. We could all see it. Those who worked up close and those who watched from far away. We got to witness a miracle in Charlie's life. Someone who was there when Stephen was martyred was Saul. Saul was the one taking the garment so that Stephen could be killed. And through Stephen's martyrdom, the apostle Paul was reached by Christ to go out and write the majority of the New Testament. There is no one who is irredeemable, and that is why Charlie would have wanted us to know about his faith in Jesus Christ. The power of Christ's blood and power of martyrdom speaks through Charlie. The Apostle Paul would go on to write the book of Romans. And you see the theme. Charlie's a martyr like Stephen. Stephen led Paul to Christ. Paul wrote Romans, and particularly Romans 13. It's a genius level of argument here.
It's just so predictable.
The power of Christ's blood and the power of martyrdom speaks through Charlie. Apostle Paul would go on to write the book of Romans, in Romans 13. And this is where it gets a little nutty. I'm quoting
where it gets nutty.
Well, okay. In Romans 13, the Apostle Paul talks about a godly government. Now, he doesn't talk about a godly government, but we'll get to that. I'm just going to read what he says and not comment on it. All right, so here we go. In Romans 13, the Apostle Paul talks about a godly government instituted by our Lord and Savior. And what does he describe? The Apostle Paul describes how God establishes the rulers of the nations. In the audience right now, there are rulers of our land. Represented right here is the State Department, the Department of War, the Department of Justice, the Chief Executive. God has instituted them. God has given them power over our nation and our land. God has saved our president, President Trump, from an assassin's bullet for this moment. Standing ovation. And what does the Apostle Paul say about godly leadership? He says that rulers wield the sword for the protection of good men and for the terror of evil men. May we pray that our rulers here, rightfully instituted and given power by our God, wield the sword for the terror of evil men in our nation in Charlie's memory. I want to live in a country where the evil are terrified and where the good, the faithful, the moral people, he gestures at the audience, and our nation can live in peace, debate in peace, disagree in peace, and start families in peace. And so we want to thank the administration for being here and carrying out that godly mission of wielding the sword against evil. In conclusion, I want to close with Charlie's advice to young men. Center your life on Christ, fall in love, get married, have 1 million kids, and live out your American dream. And by doing so, we can create millions and millions and millions of Charlie Kirks, and we can save our land. That's always the goal. Save. This is what we talked about last time. Save our land. This will be our turning point. God bless you.
Title plug.
So
I feel like we need to do a deep dive on Stephen's speech at some point, because that's been invoked a few times now over the past few weeks. I don't know if that's just like everyone's like looking for a martyr, and then they're like, oh, Stephen.
Dude, totally.
But like part of his whole speech, like the what economy are you building? What he questioned back with in his speech before he was martyred is so antithetical to this entire thing. It's unbelievable.
All right, so we have just in the past week, Erica Kirk's statement juxtaposed with President Trump's. We have the Lord's Prayer juxtaposed with military imagery and power, and then Benny Johnson's speech, one among many different statements that seems to blend a lot of Jesus and Bible language with something else. So syncretism is the word for the day. This episode is brought to you by the word syncretism. The letter S. And obviously, I mean, I don't want to mock this, because it all sounds, the language, the danger is that the language just sounds so familiar and so Christian. This is the language of our Sunday schools. This is the language of our evangelistic crusades. What could be threatening about this? Of course, we want evil men to be terrorized and we want to live in peace. I mean, who wouldn't want that? And Charlie loved Jesus, and Charlie's faith led him to speak out about these issues. He was killed for these issues, so he was killed for his faith. And he's in a long line of people killed for their faith, right? Stephen was the first one. And then, of course, Paul was influenced by Stephen's martyrdom. Not true. Paul had an encounter with the risen Jesus, but that's a different story. Although indirectly, maybe Stephen's martyrdom had something, but Paul wasn't directly affected by it. But then Paul wrote Romans 13. And we did. Please, my friends, if you're listening and you've made it to this point, all 6 of you, please go back to Romans 13, the episode we did on Romans 13. Yes, we did. We got like 6 comments on YouTube that were like, I'm one of the 6, or I'm one of the 4. We had 6 people who said they were one of the 4. So, but the misuse, I mean, there is nothing here about a godly government, and it never says individual rulers are anointed by God. But man, here's the hijacking of biblical language to give sanction to the military violence of the administration, no matter which direction that occurs. It could be Venezuelan boats that we have not yet known for sure that these are traffickers. They could be ICE protesters. I mean, we could be cracking down in American cities, but because they're instituted by God and they wield the sword for the terror of evil people, it justifies whatever they do. Yes. Yeah. And then the version of masculinity that he ends with. So I guess if you're single, you're not a godly man. If you don't have 1 million kids, you're not a godly man. If you don't live out your American dream, you're not a godly man. I mean, come on. So let's run these 3 instances through the grid Rich Vladas brought up last week. How do you know you've fallen prey to culture war or Christian nationalist thinking? How do you know? Well, let's run all of this through that grid. So he said, and I want to affirm that I am thrilled with Erica Kirk's example. I'm always in for public mentions of Jesus and people going to church, and I'm all for that. But this raises so many questions. So culture war thinking versus gospel thinking. All right, you've succumbed to culture war thinking when we carry a God is with us, but not with them impulse. Mm-hmm. And all of this is drenched in it. It just is. And this is blasphemous. It's not just idolatrous, but it's claiming divine prerogative for the actions of empire. Mm-hmm. And the assumption here is God is only on one side. And you could not, I'm sorry to speak in hyperbolic terms, but I don't know that you could not say anything more antithetical to the grace of Jesus than that the best way to love our political enemies is to despise them. Mm-hmm. And say that God's not on their side. Amazing. So I think fail on issue number 1. Issue number 2 from Rich. We no longer see image bearers as to be engaged, but threats to be eliminated. Man, this thing is full of dehumanizing language. Yeah, I mean,
I just see the Family Feud, the red X's. You're just like the first one, second one,
right. And when you no longer see your opponents as image bearers, and when fear, anger, and self-preservation take root in our hearts, we only see enemies. We move from dialogue to dismissal, from presence to elimination, and the dehumanizing impulse of them is all over.
This is not new. This is segregation. No. This is how we treated the indigenous culture here. This is how we treated women. This is how we treated the Japanese during the war. Like,
so give me your X.
This.
So you put an X on this one.
Yep.
Number 3. We believe that we're fighting for truth, so our hatred and contempt is justified, and dripping with this. Absolutely. The truth is so important. 4, we believe political power is necessary to make the most of the gospel. Absolutely. It's literally identified. The way that we spread the gospel is by voting in a specific way and putting people in power. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why at his memorial, they were voting. They were voter registration booths, which is just fascinating. And so give me an X on that one. And then fear is the primary lens through which we see the world. Oh, ooh. My friends, we just want to live in peace. That's all we want. That's all we want. These damn immigrants, this woke mob, these are the instigators, whatever. And so to wrap Jesus language into a political system like that does several things. Number 1, it guarantees that only those on the same side of the political aisle will hear it. Right? Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know. I thought the mandate was to make disciples of all nations rather than just make disciples of Republicans.
This is so infuriating. It made me blurry.
Yes. Your camera got angry. Number two, great. All of these people are coming to faith, but into what faith are they coming?
Yeah.
This is not the faith handed down by the apostles. This is not the faith proclaimed by the early church. And it doesn't bear the fruit of anything resembling legitimate, like Jesus likeness. So, okay, if you're going to churches that say that Charlie Kirk is a martyr and should be emulated, and that enemies are to be resisted rather than loved, then I don't care if you're going to church. You're going to a bad one. One scholar put it this way. And if a newly formed faith emerged from this event, into what context would it grow in order to be able to distinguish the scriptural message from the partisan one?
Mm-hmm.
For them, it's identical. And not only that, but you put hurdle after hurdle in the way of anybody who does not already agree with your assumptions coming into faith in Christ. And so that's point number one. Point number two is, and this is a point that's long been made, the medium is the message. So juxtaposing fighter planes next to the Lord's Prayer, you can say, yeah, but it's the Lord's Prayer. Does the imagery alter the meaning of the message in any way? We would say, absolutely it does. Christ's work can only be done Christ's way. And so to kingdom come will be done on earth as it is in heaven, to images of planes, boats, and fighters? Come on, bro.
Yeah.
Come on. That's nuts. So does the imagery alter the message? Absolutely it does. And it corrupts it. Secondly, are we experiencing revival? Like I said, I think revival can only be named after the fact, not during.
And this isn't even during. They wrote that speech before the event. So,
well, I mean, they knew a bunch of people were going to show up. They knew they were going to sing worship songs. And it's
manufacture a revival.
But it's like the gun episode we did. How true. But like, how do you worship and sing praises in these ways and give everyone this really emotional feeling, and then sanction unbiblical practices, or at least language, and ignore the Old Testament prophets that away with the noise of your songs? Yep. It's like the fruit of real revival. So Asbury, we had this Asbury revival several years ago. Okay, well, is there more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Are there more churches that bear witness to Jesus that way? Or was it just a great time for personal individual repentance? And I'm all for personal individual repentance, but that's not revival. Revival. I mean, truly revival, when the Spirit engages and forms people into communities that bear the fruit of the Spirit, well, that's revival. Absolutely. But if there's no fruit, and there's certainly no fruit that produces the works that God our Father loves, which are taking care of the poor and the widow and orphan in their distress and not being polluted from the world, I don't know. Is it revival then? If for 24 hours people are praying? I mean, I'm all for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just against the labeling of revival, because the marks of the Spirit are clear. It has nothing to do with singing, weeping, or certain feeling emotional states in your heart.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that like a deep devotional life is a central part of relationship with Jesus. I want to cultivate one myself, but I would never call that revival. What revival is when communities of people bear witness to Jesus in Jesus-like ways in order to transform culture to the ends for which Jesus came and died, right? I mean, that and so I don't buy. You cannot have a revival around taking the country back, or voting a certain way, or having children. Like, those are all fine things, but those aren't reviving things. So I just don't buy it. Large crowds who feel emotional things doesn't mean revival. That's just true. And especially when there are some fruit of this that has to do with anger and fear, division and violence. There are other words for that. And then thirdly, and not surprisingly, man, Jesus calls us out of our tribalism. He never reinforces it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the texts that's getting quoted all over the place is this where Jesus says, "Do not suppose I've come to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." And so people are saying, listen, it's okay to be divisive for the sake of truth. Jesus was divisive for the sake of truth. And, and so if Jesus didn't come to bring peace, then why are we so interested in keeping the peace at the cost of saying the truth to people?
Mm-hmm.
And so they cheer like President Trump's divisive rhetoric in the name of verses like this. And so I just want to take a second. Jeff Holzclaw had this really great riff on this, where he asked the question. He's like, okay, so Jesus came bringing a sword, but what did the sword cut exactly? What was the division that was happening? Well, the verse tells us it had nothing to do with dividing political opponents that we believe are destroying our country, or those with different views about sexuality, or the illegals violating our laws, or whoever it is that's keeping America from being great. So we can't just take up the sword and cut in Jesus's name. The sword was cutting, and he names it, the family and tribal bonds of ancient Israel that would have restricted people from following Christ. That's what the sword was cutting. The sword is cutting extended family relationships. Now, to Americans, this makes zero sense. Zero sense, because part of our becoming self-fulfilled is leaving our family of origin and escaping our parents' and society's expectations for us to become truly ourselves, right? This makes no sense. But in ancient cultures, as well as some modern ones, like the kinship unit is the family, and your identity is found in and through the family. And so the sword is cutting the knots of kinship ties, bloodlines that spread throughout multiple generations, many marriages that form families, clans, and tribal units. All right. And so tribal unit, in the West, we don't think about kinship ties, how deep they run. We're too individualistic about that. But in the ancient world, family, clan, and tribe, that was the order: family, clan, and tribe. Those connections gave you identity and meaning and purpose and belonging. They also came with duties and commitments and obligations and expectations. And so the family, clan, tribe unit is who you are and determines what you do. And so when Jesus talks about loving your enemies, one, the idea of your neighbors are your family, clan, and tribe units. Your enemies are anyone who's not that. Your loyalty is family, clan, and tribe in ways that we can't even begin to understand. And so for Jesus to come and invite people away, like to take two brothers away from their father's occupation as being fishermen, to take two brothers away from that, like that's a massive cultural thing, right? Are you there, Timothy?
Mm-hmm.
Are you listening to me? What are you looking
I'm texting
at?
My kids. I got to run to the dentist.
Oh Lord!
My kids.
All right, I'll hurry up. The sword here is cutting the family, tribal, clan way of loyalty in the ancient world. And what Jesus is actually doing is the sword means to cut tribalism as the ongoing framework for human relationships. That's what the sword is cutting. Because tribalism was literally, my tribe is the most important thing about me. And Jesus is saying you cannot be tribal and follow me at the same time. So for earthly tribes to use this in justification for dividing into tribal units is exactly the wrong thing. Right? I mean, Jesus was so clear about this. To follow him is to abandon all other tribal affiliations. So instead of saying anyone who loves his father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, he would say anyone who loves their political party more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves Charlie Kirk more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves what is happening on either side of the aisle more than me is not worthy of me. Yeah. Anyone who is more passionate about who sits on the Supreme Court than me is not worthy of me, right? I mean, he would have loads to say about this. And he would have much to say. Many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not do many great things in your name and perform many miracles? Did we not have revival break out in your name? And I will say, depart from me, those who never knew you. Only those who do the will of my Father are the ones that I know. Well, what's the will of the Father? Well, Jesus was really clear about this, right? Love those who do not love you. Loving those who love you, that's tribal. Even pagans do that. Love those who don't love you, that's Jesus-y. And that means you're children of the Father. So the no duh statement is that we are confronted yet again with two Christianities. Mm-hmm. And they both represent identity statements. So a guy named Ryan Burge has done incredible work on evangelicals' political identity is now the biggest factor in their religious identity. And so we have to flip that around. So we have to build identity forming communities that are cruciform in shape and nature and mission, that allow people to have identities that are bigger than the tribal affiliations. And that's what Jesus did, right? With Matthew, the tax collector, and Simon the Zealot. They would have had radically different visions of what was good for Israel. They would have had radically different visions of family values. They would have radically different visions on even what the Messiah would be like. And yet Jesus gave them an identity that was bigger than that. And because we're not in the identity business as Jesus followers, we're in the salvation business, so we think. We leave people wide open for identity and tribal markers that fill the gap that should be filled by the church and affiliation and movement in the church. And so that's what we're going to talk about maybe next week is what can the church learn from what's happening here? Because as we've seen in the last 10 years, there's a massive failure of discipleship that the church has to reckon with. I sit in a church of, I don't know how many hundreds of people, and I'm like, okay, so let's say if we have to wear masks again, how do we respond? Let's say there are racial riots. How would we respond? Let's say there's a January 6th again. How would we respond? What does Jesus likeness look like? And if we wouldn't respond like Jesus, then what are we doing every Sunday? Like literally, what's the point? So go get your kids. We love them. We love you all. We have to go. We love you guys so much. See you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. The Voxology Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology Podcast or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search Voxology Podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook /Voxology Podcast or on Instagram at Voxology Podcast and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erre. Thank you for walking this long road with us.